Thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library for our Speech and Language Developmental Milestones series. My name is Miriam Mayer, and I am an Adult Services Specialist for the library. We are so excited to have you all here and to be joined by our partner, Meredith Rose from Home Tele SLP. Meredith Rose, MSCC SLP, is a pediatric speech language pathologist and owner of Home Tele SLP, which was founded in June of 2020. She was inspired to become a speech language pathologist over 20 years ago, following her youngest brother's diagnosis with an autism spectrum disorder. She strives to improve her clients' communication skills throughout the implementation of fun, yet functional therapy activities that are culturally responsive in their school or home environment via teletherapy. Please welcome Meredith Rose.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining me for today's presentation on speech and language developmental milestones for children between the ages of 2 and 3. What we'll be talking about today are the speech and language developmental milestones that you can expect for your child to achieve or to be working toward at these particular ages and stages. However, every child's development is different. So some children may reach developmental milestones a little early. Some children may reach certain developmental milestones a little late. One thing that I love to do at the beginning of each and every presentation is just kind of get a feel of who is in the room today. So if you would please take a moment and type in the chat whether you are a mother, a father, maybe you're a grandmother or a grandfather or an uncle or aunt that is caretaker for the child or children in your lives that are between the ages of 2 to 3. Excuse me. And if you could also type in the chat, in addition to your role, the age or ages of the children that you have in your care that fall into that age range. That will give me a general idea of who is in the room and where to really focus the content of my presentation. So in general, we're going to talk about these different areas of speech and language development. First, we'll start off by talking about speech versus language. We'll discuss a little bit of the feeding milestones that your child may have already achieved, whether it's feeding by mouth, eating solids, drinking liquids. We'll talk about some of the stages there. And then we'll also briefly discuss the speech sound acquisition, as well as pronouns, morphology, which has to do with word units and word endings, the mean length of utterance, which is how many words your child may be using. Maybe they're using single words, or they're using 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases, or some children may also be speaking in simple sentences, depending on where they are with their milestones. And then we'll talk about pragmatics, which is social language, as well as literacy. And literacy goes hand in hand with language. So often speech language pathologists, when we're working on language, we also include literacy. So we'll talk about the importance of reading. And just so that you're aware, if you've not attended our prior events, the ones that we have in person throughout the year are focused on emergent literacy skills. So how to really incorporate or target certain speech and language concepts while you're reading with your child. So we'll talk a little bit about language and literacy, as well as some basic concepts. So when you think of basic concepts, you may think of things like colors, shapes, sizes. We'll discuss vocabulary and how large your child's vocabulary should be or may be based on their age, as well as questions. So children ask a lot of questions, and we'll talk about the types of questions that are great to target with your little one while they're answering and learning how to ask questions. And then we'll wrap up our presentation highlighting some listening skill milestones. So I want to start by differentiating the difference between speech and language. And one thing that is really important is hearing screenings. So when your child is young, when your child is a baby, let's start there. When they're born in the NICU, and they're in the NICU, excuse me, Oftentimes there's someone who's going in and checking their hearing, making sure that the signals being sent to the brain to show us that the child is able to hear. And hearing is necessary for speech sound development, for speech and language development. And so it's really important to make sure that your child, as they're having their annual physicals, there's certain times that they're due for hearing screening and vision screening. So really important to make sure that your child's hearing is within the normal range so that we know that their speech sound development is not impacted by a possible hearing loss. I see someone's typed something in the chat. Okay, we have a mother of a 1-year-old. So yes, we had our session for children 1 to 2 last month, but this one is for children 2 to 3, but please feel free to stick around if you'd like to learn more about the upcoming speech and language developmental milestones to expect for your child. So when we talk about speech, it's an umbrella term. We're including things such as not just speech, sound production, but also voice. So the quality of a child's voice. Is the voice harsh or raspy? Is it hoarse? Sometimes if a child has allergies or asthma, there may be environmental factors that impact the quality of their voice. Under the umbrella of speech, in addition to speech sounds and the voice, is also fluency. And fluency has to do with how smoothly, for example, your child is able to connect their words and phrases and words in conversational speech when they're speaking. So when we talk about fluency, the disorder that highlights that are stuttering disorders or fluency disorders. So if a child is disfluent, they may have a stuttering disorder, or it just may be developmental. As they're acquiring more language and their vocabulary is growing and they're processing all of the things that they're trying to say, there is a natural period where a child may have trouble being fluent. And so we monitor that disfluency to see if it's a true disfluency or stuttering disorder, or if it's just part of their development as they're, acquiring more language and their brain is processing everything they're taking in. In addition to that, when we talk about speech, we're also talking about the oral motor mechanism. So our lips, our tongue, our teeth, our jaw, the muscles in our mouth that help us to coordinate the sounds that we produce. And with those sounds, we build words and phrases and sentences. So when we're talking about speech, those are the things that are falling under that umbrella. Okay, and someone just commented that their son is 3 and strains his voice. And my recommendation would be to definitely mention this to your pediatrician so that they can possibly, if needed, refer your child to an ENT. But your first step, or ear, nose, and throat doctor, but your first step would definitely be to share that concern with your pediatrician. Thank you for commenting in the chat. So let's talk a little bit about language. Language is foundational to your child's learning, So language is something that we start to acquire before we can even speak. A child, while they're very young, is observing things in their environment. They're listening, they're learning what words go with what objects before they can even, utter sounds. They're starting to really just absorb everything by what they're seeing and by what they're hearing. So that part of language where you're processing what you're taking in, whether it's auditorily with your ears or visually with your eyes, that is receptive language. So receptive language has to do with understanding language. For example, at this age, we're working on concepts such as maybe following directions, being able to point to something with names, when it's named, being able to identify multiple pictures or objects from a field or an array. So if there's like 4 different items on a table and having the child to point to the one that's named, all of these things are part of receptive language, listening skills, etc. And then we have on the other side of that expressive language, and that's spoken language. So using our words, using even our body language, even though that's not spoken, it's still expressive language, using gestures, And some children may be learning sign language in school. So even using sign, or maybe you've taught your child baby sign, all of those things fall under expressive language. And then we also have a small part of expressive language that includes what's known as pragmatics or social skills. And so that really entails your child's ability to interact with others, understanding, social emotional language, understanding feelings, emotions, being able to read facial expressions, knowing how to have conversational speech and turn take while speaking with others. Those are just some examples of the different areas under the umbrellas of speech and language. So next, we're going to talk about feeding. And this is just a little snippet of the milestones for children between the ages of 2 and 3, or 24 to 36 months. So these are milestones that a child should be able to achieve by 36 months. So biting through a variety of food thicknesses, maybe, they're able to chew something very soft like bread, but then also they're able to choose through something a little bit thicker like cheese or meats, or even crunchy things. Being able to bring their spoon or fork to their mouth, palm up, and to self-feed with little spillage coming out of their mouth is also something that your child should be starting to develop. When they're younger, there's more spillage, but as they're getting older, they're able to kind of control the spoon or lick their tongue to move whatever may be on their lips inside of their mouth. Also, holding a small open cup in one hand. So moving from the bottle to a sippy cup to an open cup, and being able to have more motor control where maybe they're starting off with 2 hands, but gradually they're transitioning to being able to free one of those hands and use one hand for drinking. Also chewing more with their lips closed rather than an open mouth position where, everything is seen. It's not uncommon for children to chew with their mouth open, but being able to close their lips is more so what I'm referring to get that lip closure while they're chewing. And then we're looking to see if they're using a stable, what we call a rotary jaw action. So their jaw is aligned, their top and bottom teeth are more aligned, and they're not kind of chewing sideways. Their jaw isn't moving from side to side while they're chewing. It's more stable and moving in an up and down motion. So these are the milestones for children between the ages of 2 and 3 when we talk about feeding. And in terms of speech sound acquisition and phoneme development, there are many charts out there, but in general, these are the sounds that children should be acquiring between the ages of 2 to 3. And as you'll see at the very top of my screen here, where my arrow is, those letters and their sounds are P or P, M, H, N, W, W, B, B. And one thing you may have noticed as I was producing those sounds is that all of those sounds can be visually seen in the front of the mouth. So P, the lips, bottom and top are touching. Those are what we call bilabial sounds, meaning 2 lips touch. Same with M and W, it's a rounded sound, and B. So the lips are coming together, B, P, M. So those are our lip sounds, and W is as well. And then we have tongue tip sounds like the letter N, where the tongue is coming up and the tip of it is hitting that bumpy part between the or behind our top teeth. And so these are the sounds, in addition to H, that a child should be able to easily produce between the ages of 2 and 3. And one thing that's good to help your child with, if they have difficulty finding where to make those sounds, is to give them a prompt. So I do this for P and B, P, 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 B, 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 so that a child can feel, I'll model on my lips, but I have them to do it on their own lips where that sound is made if they're having difficulty finding that sound. Or even with For example, the letter H, using the hand and letting them feel the air that comes out of their mouth so that they know that they're releasing air when they produce that sound in that manner. So these are just some little prompts that you can use with your child. As you can see, there are other sounds underneath here. We have the letter K, K, G, G, and we know it can make different sounds, but I'm really hitting that hard G, G, and the letter D, D. So these two top sounds, K and G, are what we call velar sounds, or they're back sounds, meaning they're made in the back of the throat. And so these are sounds that also come in somewhere between the ages of 2 and 4. And those are typically easier to make if a child is having difficulty if they're lying on their back, so they can naturally have their tongue, fall to the back of their throat. It's easier for them sometimes to be able to produce that K and G. So if your child has difficulty, that's a good way to try to get them to elicit that sound. And then, of course, like I said before, we have our tongue tip sound. So D and T are actually produced in the same place. The only thing that's different is one sound is voiced, meaning your vocal cords are vibrating. So letter D, 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 is made in the same place as T. And then we have ing, so our ing sound, ing. And so that is also an early developing sound that a child should have. And as you can see, the range for that is somewhere between 2 and 6 for T and 2 and 6 for NG. And again, every child is different. So some sounds that are even further down you're in the chart, your child may be producing before they produce some sounds that are earlier in the chart. And so every child is going to be different in terms of when they produce the sound and which sounds they may have greater difficulty in producing. So along with speech sound acquisition, another thing that we talk about is phonological patterns. And these are different patterns or processes that your child produces as they're learning how to correctly enunciate or pronounce different sounds and words. So for example, this first one is called unstressed syllable deletion. I'm going to try to make this more simplistic as I'm describing by giving some examples. So if we look at the far end of the chart, an example of that process is a child saying nana instead of banana. So that simply means that they're dropping off that unstressed syllable, the B sound, and they're saying nana. It's simpler for them to maintain 2 syllables than it is for 3, and it's natural for a syllable to drop off. So they're just deleting that weak syllable. Another process, final consonant deletion, means that they are deleting a consonant at the end of the word. So perfect example is the word cat. And instead of saying cat, the child may say ka, and they drop off that final consonant. And it may be because it's hard for them to start here in the back of their throat, making the k sound, and then coming to the front of their mouth, making a vowel sound, ah, and then getting their tongue to touch the top of their mouth behind their top teeth on their alveolar ridge, or what I call the bumpy ridge. So moving across syllables, depending on where those sounds are produced in the mouth, can be difficult based on how close in proximity sounds are to each other in terms of where they're produced in the mouth. So if the word was mom, it's a little bit easier since the child is still producing the same letter at the beginning and the end of the word, versus, for example, the word game, the child is producing a G and then they're coming to the front of their mouth and producing an M. So as you're moving across syllables and either single syllable or by 2 syllable or 3 syllable words, what may be resulting in your child dropping off sounds is the position of the sound that's being produced in their mouth, where it's being produced. The next process is this one here, diminutization, and that's when you add an I sound at the end of nouns, or an E sound, I'm sorry, at the end of the noun. So a child may call a dog, doggy, a horse, horsey, and there are a lot of things that they may add that E sound to the end of. Velar fronting is what happens when a child will substitute a sound that's made in the front of the mouth for a sound that's made in the back of the mouth. So here we have the word can, and the child is saying the word tan. So instead of having that sound produced in the back of their mouth, they're making that sound in the front. And one thing that may influence it is the sound at the end. And in case you notice, if you say t and n, your tongue and teeth, they're in the same position. Everything's up front. T, n. So it's easier for a child to substitute a sound that's in the same area of the mouth than it is for them to transition from the back of their mouth, k, at, or k, an. So that's velar fronting. Another area that you might notice your child using, or a process that you may notice them using, is something called consonant assimilation. And when you think of assimilation, we think of like things that are similar. So changing a sound or phoneme is a sound, changing a sound or phoneme, so it takes on the characteristic of another sound in the word. So here we have the word cat. And some of you may have heard your child do this before with other sounds in words. So they are saying tat instead of cat because of that similar sound. They're using that same sound in another place in the word. And then the following process underneath that is reduplication. And that's when there's repeating of phonemes or sounds or repeating of syllables. And the example is the word bottle. Instead of saying bottle, the child may say baba. Instead of saying something that has maybe even 3 syllables like butterfly, they may say baba for butterfly. So they're reduplicating the sound, or they're reduplicating a syllable from the word and dropping off the rest. And then the last example that we have here is pre-vocalic voicing. And pre meaning before, vocalic, vocalization, voicing. So we're talking about substituting a voiced consonant. So for example, earlier we talked about D and T and how D is voiced and the vocal folds move during the production of D, and T is unvoiced, but they're both produced in the same place in the mouth. T, d, t, d. The D is voiced. And so sometimes a child may substitute a voiced consonant for a unvoiced or voiceless consonant that comes before a vowel. So the example here is the word sun, and the child may voice the S and make that S a Z. They may produce the voiced S, which becomes a Z sound. Z, z, z. And when Z is produced, not only are the vocal folds vibrating, the teeth are vibrating. You can feel that kind of vibration of your teeth as you produce the Z sound. So that is also another process that children use. So my question to the audience is, which of these processes have you observed your child producing? Is it an unstressed syllable deletion where they're dropping off a portion of the sound in the word? Maybe elephant is effant and they drop off, the part in the middle, or maybe they're deleting the ends of consonants. Are there any particular processes that you all are seeing that your child also produces at home, or if you're a caretaker that your little one is producing? If so, feel free to type that in the chat. So there are additional phonological patterns. And in case you're wondering, like, my kid is doing something, but she hasn't talked about that, we're probably going to talk about it next. But before we do, I want to look in the chat to see what else is happening in terms of processes that you guys are observing with your child. So Nana for banana. Yep, that's right. That's a very, very common one that children will use, that weak syllable deletion. Thank you for sharing. So now we're going to talk about some additional processes that do tend to persist after the age of 3. So these that we talked about before, the phonological processes that occur before the age of 3, these are the ones that typically should disappear. So your child shouldn't continue to use these at the age of 4 and 5. They're developmental and they go away if your child is not having any type of speech disorder. Now, if they persist, these are indicators here. If these persist, these are indicators that your child may need to have a speech evaluation and receive speech therapy to work on acquisition of those sounds after the age of 3. So here we're going to talk about sounds that do continue to persist after the age of 3, meaning these are later developing. It's not unusual for your child to still be having a little bit of trouble with these. And we're gonna start with the first one, which is cluster reduction. So clusters are two consonant sounds that are together in a word. Um, we're going to start with words that have those in the beginning. So the example here is clean. And the two letters that are together, the two consonants that are together are the K sound and the L sound. So cl, that is our cluster. And in this example, the child is reducing the cluster. They're dropping off one of those two neighboring consonants, and that clean becomes keen. The second one is epenthesis. And epenthesis means that the child is adding a sound to the word that's not there. And typically that's the sound. So they may be inserting that sound between two consonants. For example, in a consonant blend like BL, bl, it may sound like bl. So in the word black, instead of saying black, you hear them say black. And that is what you hear or you see here over on the side. This is the phonetic spelling. I didn't point that out on our previous slide, but this is what you're seeing after the arrow. It's the phonetic spelling of the words. The next process that is not unusual for your child to still be using after the age of 3 is called gliding. And that means that they're substituting the W sound and the Y sound. I know it says J, but that is the phonetic letter for Y. So they're substituting W and ya for another consonant. So for example, red, I'm going to use that because I know a lot of children have difficulty with the sound R, or saying wed instead of red. So using that W to substitute the R is also a process, and that process is called gliding. So in our example here, we have the word run being pronounced like one. I won so fast, mommy. I won so fast. And so if your child is using any of these processes, one thing that I always suggest is to provide a natural model. So instead of correcting your child and like really pointing out like you're saying that word wrong, that's not how you say it. You're supposed to say it like this, or you know that word, this is how you say it. Use a natural model instead. Oh, wow, you are running fast. Look at you run. You go so fast when you run, and you just kind of emphasize and over articulate the sound so your child can really hear it. You may even prolong it just a little bit so they can see it and hear it as you say it. But that is a natural model. Another example of a natural model is if your child, let's say they're using 1 to 2 words and they should be building more to 3 and 4, they may say red car. And you'll say maybe, yes, that is a red car. That red car is fast. Go car, go, beep, beep. You know, you're just kind of elongating their utterance and modeling for them some additional language that they can use when describing a car. The next phonological pattern that we have underneath is called vocalization or vowelization. And it's described as substituting a vowel for a consonant. So that one is a little bit easier to understand. So there's simply a child is taking a vowel and using that to simplify a consonant. And with R being a more difficult sound to produce, for some children, they may simplify it by saying so in the word car, instead of R, it becomes So car sounds like ka, 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 instead of car. The next process is stopping. And that is described as substituting what we call stop consonants for fricative. So in this example, we have the letter D. That's a stop consonant for this example that is being substituted for a fricative, the letter S. And the names don't really matter for the purpose of today's training. But the point is that your child may be substituting sounds that are more like a D sound or a B sound. They're substituting sounds for fricatives like S and F. So those sounds in a word like sun are produced done. And a word like fun maybe produce bun. And then we have depalatalization, and that is described as substituting a non-palatal sound or a sound that's not made in the palate area of your mouth with a sound made in the palate area of your mouth. So our palate, we have a hard palate and we have a soft palate. So the roof of your mouth is your hard palate. And if you go a little further back, like near where your tonsils are, that's part of your soft palate. And so what happens, for example, the letter or the sound, shh, like telling a baby, shh, it's okay, don't cry, shh, is a sound that's produced in the middle of the mouth. The child can't really see what's happening because the teeth are closed, right? And the tongue is kind of, moving in a way that a child could not see. Shh, it's steady. It's not easy to visualize unless you're looking at an image of what's happening with the teeth being closed. But instead of making the sh sound, a child will say, s, and they'll make that sh sound a non-palatal sound. They'll use a fricative. So shy may sound like sigh. And the final phonological pattern is final consonant devoicing. So substituting a voiceless consonant, final consonant, like in the word bag, it becomes back for a voice consonant. So instead of having that G sound, which is voice produced, a child may produce the K, which is not voiced. Here are some additional patterns, and more than anything, I want you to see the likely age of disappearance for these. So for example, mat being produced like bat, that should go away by the child turning 3. So by the time they're 2.5 years old, they should not be using that particular process. Saying tat for cat by the age of 3, saying chip or cheap, I'm sorry, for sheep, should be a process that disappears by 3 as well. And simplifying or deleting the consonant at the end of a word, for example, in the word cat, producing ka, that should also disappear by the age of 3. And then for the ones that should be disappearing by the age of 4, those are the processes that we described before. Fronting, for example, saying tan for can, deaffrication, which is described as replacing the affricate. So ch becomes s, so chip becomes sip, grape becomes gape. These are things that should also disappear by 4. And then by 4.5, if the child is still substituting the palatal sounds like sh for stops like t, so dish, dit, that should also be ending by 4.5. These are just more examples, and these handouts will be available to you all via email, but these should be sounds that are also disappearing, or phonological processes, excuse me, that should also be disappearing by these ages here on the right. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is speech intelligibility expectations. And these are the ranges of intelligible speech that your child should have. So when they're under 2 years of age, let's say 1.5 to 2, their intelligibility may be somewhere between 25 and 50%. And most of the time, the caregivers, mom, dad, grandparents, whoever spends the most amount of time with the child can easily decode what they're saying. They can easily figure out what they mean when they, mispronounce a word, because they know their sound system better than anyone who's unfamiliar with their sound system. Between the ages of 2 and 3, your child's intelligibility of speech is increasing. And so now they should be somewhere between 50 to 75% intelligible. And the older they get, as you can see, 4 to 5 and 5 plus, they're getting closer to 90 and 100% intelligibility. And no one is 100% intelligibility. I'm sorry, 100% intelligible. We all make mistakes. As you can see, as I'm speaking during the presentation, my speech is not 100% intelligible, but it is somewhere between 90 and 100%. And that's where we all fall. At what age is this question? Let's see. At what age should children have these sounds secure in their vocabulary? I know some charts say up to 3 years, a child should have these sounds. Yes, so every chart is going to be a little bit different. So these are ranges. So let's say like your child is 4 and they're still having difficulty with those sounds. A speech evaluation would be helpful to determine whether or not the child has a speech disorder. So basically, you want to see, is the child stimulable? Meaning, can they produce the sound? If they can't produce the sound, then it's a sound that they should have been able to achieve at an earlier age, then that is a good indicator that a child may be in need of a speech evaluation, just to rule out a speech sound disorder. Great question. So then we're gonna talk a little bit about, now after talking about intelligibility, sorry, I kind of lost track. We're gonna talk a little bit about pronouns. So these are parts of speech, or a part of speech. We have different age ranges for each one on the left. And on the right side, we have the examples of the pronouns. So a child between 1 year to 2 years is using the pronouns I and it a lot. I for, subjects, objective pronoun example is it. So I and it are used more frequently than words like mine, me, mine, and you, which you really start to see when the child is somewhere between 2 and almost 3 years of age. So everything is mine, 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 me, you. And then between 31 and 34 months, we're starting to see use of other varied pronouns like your, she, he, yours, and we. And between 35 and 40 months, other pronouns emerge that refer to others, such as they, us, hers, his, them, her. So we're using possessive pronouns and other forms of pronouns as we get older. And so morphology is the next area that we're going to highlight, and this has to do with using different word endings. For example, ing, a baby crying between the ages of 19 and 28 months is when you start to see your child using the action or present progressive form of verbs. So instead of saying just cry, they're saying crying. Between 29 and 38 months, they're adding the S sound to the end of words. So instead of the word sock, it becomes socks. Instead of the word cat, it becomes cats. And then we're seeing the addition of nouns to verbs. So present progressive ing is being used in combination with a noun. So baby crying instead of just crying. Using words like gotta, gonna, wanna, those are called semi-auxiliaries. And then we have overgeneralization of past tense words with a ed ending, like I run. That is something that is part of normal development when a child is using those forms. They're incorrect grammatically, but it is part of their development as they're learning the sound system. And then possessive S, like apostrophe S, showing possessive of whose hat, the girl's hat, and present tense verbs such as can, will, be, and do. Those are our present tense auxiliary verbs. Now, mean length of utterance will vary in terms of the different Brown stages of language development. The lower the stage, the lower the mean length of utterance. So in stage 1, when a child is between 1 and let's say 2 years of age, they should be using somewhere around 1 to 2 word utterances. They may be using intonation to answer, or ask yes, no questions. They may be using some limited what questions, who, what doing questions. And then in terms of the second stage, when they're between 2 and maybe 2.5 years of age, their mean length of utterance is increasing to 2 words to 2.5 words. So by this age, they're starting to use more morphemes, and they may be using some positional concepts or prepositions like in and on. At Brown stage 3, when your child is somewhere around 31 to 34 months old, they are increasing their mean length of utterance to 2.5 words to 3 words. And they're also starting to use more WH question words, starting to ask more questions and reversing them, increasing the length. And that happens due to the use of the different auxiliary verbs that they're using as well. And then in the 4th stage, when a child is between 35 and 40 months, they're using somewhere between 3 and 4 words. So there are different object noun phrases that they're using. And so their phrases are becoming more descriptive. Now, when we talk about pragmatics and social language, the milestones that we're looking for when your child is between 2 and 3 years of age is their ability to not only observe social interactions with others, but to want to join in those interactions. So maybe a child is very shy and they initially start off by watching other children and briefly, engaging in play. There may be some parallel play coming into the scenario where maybe they're sitting next to another child who's building blocks and they're building blocks, but eventually they're joining in and they're playing and interacting with the child as well. They're requesting permission for items. So maybe if they're at a craft table and someone has scissors and glue and they need scissors and glue, they're asking if they can use what someone else is using. Beginning to use language for jokes and teasing is another milestone. And then being able to correct mistakes in their conversation when the listener does not respond, or maybe they're gaining attention by repeating what they said if they see that their listener is not following along in the conversation. For literacy, between the ages of 2 and 3 years of age, some of the milestones include listening to books or stories for long periods of time, holding a book correctly, so knowing to hold it, this way and not this way, knowing that we read a book from left to right and that we don't start in the back, and beginning to recognize different logos in their environment. For example, the M for McDonald's and common other signage in their area, things that they see while you're driving in the car, being able to associate those logos or symbols with the words that they represent. And then also beginning to show difference in writing versus drawing. So maybe when they're really young, they're scribbling on paper, but as they're getting older, they're learning how to draw shapes and they're drawing body parts and they're putting features on a person or features on an animal. These are all milestones that are related to literacy. These are emergent literacy skills. In terms of phonological awareness, some of the skills that we are working on when children are between the ages of 2 and 3 include syllable segmentation. So being able, for example, to count syllables in a word by clapping them out. So maybe while you're singing a nursery rhyme, you're clapping out the syllables. Maybe as a child is learning a word that has multi-syllables, like butterfly or elephant, or even something like basketball, clapping out the syllables helps them to be able to hear the sounds in the word and to kind of hear that there are multiple parts. And then when they're trying to produce the sound, they can kind of make sure that they're incorporating those syllables. So how many syllables do you hear in butterfly? That's a really simple activity you can do with your child when it comes to multi-syllable words. Let's count. Butterfly. Oh, that's 1. That's 2. Fly, that's 3 syllables. Another phonological awareness skill is syllable blending. So blending syllables into a word after they are given separately. And that is a really fun game to play. So for example, what word do you hear when I say cow, boy, cowboy, cowboy, cowboy? That's the word. And you may have the 2 words set further apart, cow, boy, and just bringing your hands closer. Rhyming. So here we're really, exposing our children to rhyming through nursery rhymes, all sorts of songs. And so this is really just working on your child's ability to identify words that sound alike or rhyme. And this is a fun game to play while you're driving in the car. Which word rhymes with Matt? And maybe they can't say on their own cat. So you may give them options. Is it star or hat? Matt star, Matt hat. Which one sounds the same? Those are some ways that you can prompt the correct answer from your child if they're not able, again, to think of a word that rhymes on their own, giving them a choice of 2 words. The next skill is phoneme isolation. And that means that they're able to identify whether given a sound that occurs at the beginning, middle, or end of a word. So in the word sun, is the S at the beginning, the middle, or the end? S, Where do you hear the letter or the sound S? S, And you might even have your fingers up. S, Is it the beginning? Is it the middle? Or is it the end of the word? So that is another way to work on that skill. And the last one listed here is initial alliteration. So identifying, or your child is able to identify the beginning sound in a word. So you may ask the question, which word begins with T? Is it toad or is it boat? And maybe even using a prompt, a finger prompt would be helpful. Which word begins with T? Look at my mouth. Is it toad or is it boat? So giving them that prompt, they're able to see, oh, wait, that sound is the same. Toad, boat. Oh, those are different. Toad. That one begins with letter T, toad. So the next one that we're going to talk about is final alliteration, and that is the opposite, being able to identify the last sound in a word. So here's the question. Which word begins with, or I'm sorry, ends with B? Is it dog? And again, using that finger prompt so they can see where that sound is really produced. Or is it tub? Which one has the same ending sound? B. Which one ends with that sound? B. Is it dog or is it tub? So that gives them a little bit of a clue if they're having a hard time differentiating with, in terms of just hearing it, they can also see where the sound is produced. Next is sound blending. Blending sounds into a word after they are given separately. This is also a fun activity to do. So you can actually do this with letter sounds too. I'm sorry, with letter sounds, letter magnets, that's what I meant to say. Letter magnets or even letter blocks. So you could have out the letters for each of the words you're working on. So there would be a block or a letter magnet for B, A, and T. And you ask your child, what word do you hear when I say B, A, T? And I don't know if we have any caregivers on the call who watched a lot of Sesame Street growing up, but I remember the monsters getting the letters and they were pushing them together, right? And then they would blend the letters to form the word. So b, at, b, at, b, at, bat. The word is bat. So that's a really fun way, getting out those magnetic letters on the refrigerator, having them on the fridge, or getting blocks and having them on a table and doing that activity. The next is sound deletion. So deleting a given sound from a word and saying the new word. Here's the example. Let's say cup without the k. And if your child is more visual, again, using magnets on the refrigerator or using blocks on the table where you have the letters C, U, and P, and you take away the K. Maybe that visual is easier than your child having to manipulate that in their mind at this age. Trust me, we definitely want to use objects as much as possible. So use those letters on the refrigerator, use the blocks on the table or on the floor, and just really make it fun and make it something that they can manipulate. Sound deletion is really easy to do. Same with sound substitution. This is even more fun, I think. So, having that extra sound that we're going to substitute or replace. So for example, say the word top. Now change to, so maybe you have T, O, and P, whether they're magnetic letters on the refrigerator or they're blocks on the table. You're going to also have the letter H, and you're going to have your child to help you. Some of this may be more hands-on, where you're really the one manipulating, or you're providing a lot of hands-on, hand-over-hand assistance. You're going to help your child to see, like, what happens when we take away the T and we put an H? Let's see. We have a new word. Hop. So, seeing what happens when we move the letters to different positions in words is a really fun way to start to work on letter sound correspondence and blending and addition and all these things that we've talked about so far. And then the last thing here is sound grapheme matching. And I talked a little bit about letter sound correspondence just a moment ago. So this is where we're heading next. Identifying graphemes, which are letters associated with individual sounds. So if you have all the letters on the fridge, you could play a game where you say, I spy with my little eye a letter that says, And maybe having all the letters is a lot, but maybe you start with 3 letters. And having a field of 3 is better than a field of 2 because we can really figure out if our child knows the answer or if they're guessing the answer when there's just 2 items. So you may start off with just 3 letters, right? Whether it's on the fridge or out on the table in front of you. But you're going to just try to see if they can identify the sound that they're hearing with the letter. And something that's really good to keep in mind is to not have letters out that look the same. So like if I'm doing 3 letters, I might do letters that look very different, not A and O if they're lowercase, not M, N, and W because the shapes are kind of similar, not P and B, but maybe like the letter S, maybe the letter O, maybe the letter M. So all those letters look very different. Same with the sound of the letter. Maybe the higher you're getting in the hierarchy of making things difficult with your child, you can put out the letters that look more similar and the letters that sound more alike. So maybe I might put like S with the Z and another letter, or I might put like T with the D and another letter because those letter sounds kind of sound the same. So if you want to make things more challenging, you can put more similar letters together when you're having your child to find a letter. Whether it's find the letter that I named, find the letter B, or find the sound that says B. All right, so we are coming to a close, and next we're going to talk about concepts. So these are some of the milestones that your child should be achieving in the area of concepts, using positions and being able to tell the difference between the positional concepts in, under, one, and many. So, like put it in, take it out, put it on the bear. Oh, put it under the bed. Oh, can you give me one of the one of the balls? Oh, can you give me many cards? How many do you have? Oh, I have 3. Oh, that is a lot. Who has the most? Understanding number concepts of 1 and 2. Understanding size differences such as big and little. Understanding in, off, on, under, out of, together, away, and from. Understanding time concepts like soon, later, and wait. Those are hard. And one thing I will tell you with all of these concepts is to use visuals as much as possible. Make these hand-on activities. So maybe you have your shoes side by side. Oh, who has big shoes? Does mommy have big shoes? Or do you have big shoes? Oh, which one? Show me big, touch big. Oh, which one's little? Show me little. And maybe you're modeling, you're showing the big and you're showing the little, but you're doing things that are around the house. Maybe folding laundry. Oh, who has the big pants? Daddy's pants are big. Who has the little pants? Oh, look, baby's pants are little. And then when we talked about concepts, actually showing what those concepts are. Oh, let's go under the table. Oh, let's put this on the bed. Oh, will you take your shoes out of the closet? Put the book in the bag. Really helping them to understand the concepts by allowing them to practice using them is wonderful. And then the next thing that they suggest here to work on, these are milestones that a child should have between 2 and 3, are selecting 3 that are the same from a set of 4 objects. So maybe there are 4 items set out and we're finding 3 that are the same. Maybe one thing is very, very different. This could be really anything around the house. Maybe you have 3 spoons set out and the 4th thing is a fork, and having your child to find the ones that are the same. Or maybe it's cars, and maybe all the cars are red but one is black. Find the ones that are the same. The next is select the objects that is not the same from 4 objects. So kind of the reverse of what I just explained. And then you want for your child to be able to use adjectives for color and size. So rather than pointing and identifying big and identifying little, now they're able to say, oh, that's a big big car. Oh, that's a little ball. Or, oh, woo, that's a red car. Or this is a black car. So being able to be descriptive using concepts. And as you can see on this slide, as your child is getting older, their word use is growing exponentially. So for example, this 12-month-old range of words is 2 to 6, right? A 36-month-old, their age range is somewhere around 1,000. And by the time a child is 6 years, it's somewhere between 2,600 and 7,000. So your child's vocabulary is constantly growing day in and day out. And you can expose your child to a lot of words through what? Reading books. So go to your local library throughout the summer and check out books that are related to subjects that your child is really interested in. We are going a little bit over, but I'm going to wrap this up quickly. So the next area of language we're talking about is questions, answering questions and asking questions. And when your child is little, they may point to objects more so than they ask questions. But as they're getting older, for example, here we have points to objects when described, such as what do you wear on your head? So if I'm describing it, they're able to receptively identify it. Here's another example of questions when it comes to answering them. When the child is between 2 and 3 years of age, or sorry, 2 to 3 years of age, I might prompt them by asking them where questions, or what's that, or what's doing. Well, your child may also start doing that too. They're also asking you questions. They're being the teacher too. They want to ask you, what's that? Who is this? Where's the whatever it is, an object? Where's the car? And many times I notice when working with my students, when I'm asking them questions to work on a skill, they love playing teacher. So play teacher with your kid. You know, maybe you're playing I spy, but you're using more WH questions. Instead of saying I spy, you're saying, what flies in the sky? Or, what is something that swims in the ocean that has 8 legs? Just practice using those WH words in a form of playing the game I Spy. The last thing that we're going to talk about are listening skills. And so this is another form of receptive language. Working on listening skills involves being able to process what they're hearing, what they're seeing. So more auditory, of course, but when we're listening, we're also looking. Sometimes there's a visual component most of the time with little ones when they're listening to something, listening to a story, for example, listening to directions that you're giving them. So some of the things that they should be able to achieve around this age is body parts, being able to show me, touch your nose. Oh, where are your hands? Show me your fingers. Touch your points to your tummy. Following 2-step directions, such as get your cup and bring it to me. Also using action and adverb or action words plus an adjective. So here's an example: walk slowly, give me the red ball. So being able to follow directions that involve colors, different concepts, shapes, size. Demonstrating understanding of several verbs by selecting corresponding pictures. So maybe there are 3 pictures on the table or 4 pictures on the table or more if your child can search through arrays that are larger, and you're asking them to show me the baby sleeping, show me the boy eating, show me the girl running. And they're just really scanning. So they're visually seeing, but they're also listening to the direction to find what you're describing. And then the last milestone here that is mentioned for children between the ages of 2 and 3 is recognizing family labels such as baby and grandpa. So a great activity to do for this is to create a photo album. If you don't have many of them, because a lot of our pictures are on our phone or on a device that's a picture frame with pictures going through it, make a photo album with your kid. Go to your local Dollar Tree if you don't have an empty one sitting at home, and grab one and print out some pictures and put them in and make this, Sarah's family album, and have them go through and label the different people in the family: mommy, daddy, brother, sister. Don't forget the cat and the dog or any other pets that you have, but really having that as an opportunity for them to be able to point and identify receptively who you name, and also for them to be able to expressively name the different family members in their photo album. So that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you so much for staying to the end. Feel free to follow Home Tele SLP on social media to learn more about our events.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for this wonderful presentation. We really, really appreciate it.